The takeout box was still on the counter, cold, lid half open, fork balanced across the rim like someone had intended to come back and finish eating. Nadia had not come back. She had sat down on the bathroom floor instead, back against the tub, knees pulled to her chest, listening to the front door close for the last time. That was 3 days ago. She had not moved the takeout box. She was not sure why. Maybe because moving it would mean the week had moved on, and she was not ready for the week to move on. She was still somewhere in the middle of that Tuesday, frozen at the part where Derek had looked at her across the kitchen table and said what he said with the same calm voice he used to read grocery lists. His jacket was still on the hook by the door. Nadia stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long time. It was a gray wool jacket, the kind that cost more than it looked like it cost. She had noticed it the first night he came over. She had thought then that a man who bought good jackets was probably the kind of man who paid attention to things. She had been right. He paid very close attention, just not to the things she had assumed. She took the jacket off the hook and folded it over her arm. She walked it to the front door, opened the door, and set it on the hallway floor outside her apartment. She did not call him to say she had done it. She did not text. She closed the door and turned the latch and stood very still, with her hand still on the lock. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was not Derek. It was her friend, Cleo, who had texted 11 words in a row with escalating urgency, the way Cleo always communicated when she suspected something was wrong and was giving Nadia the chance to deny it before showing up. Nadia typed back a single word. Fine. Cleo would know that from the single word but would respect it for approximately 40 minutes before showing up anyway. Nadia went to the bathroom and washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. She had done this several times over the past 3 days, not out of vanity, out of something closer to necessity, the way you check a wound to see if it has gotten worse. Her face looked like her face. Dark eyes, the kind that people described as expressive, which she had learned was a polite way of saying she could not hide anything. Brown skin, a little dry at the cheeks because she had not been drinking enough water. Full mouth, the lower lip slightly fuller than the upper, a thing Derek had once said he loved. She turned off the bathroom light. She did not want to think about the things Derek had once said he loved. That inventory led somewhere she was not ready to go. Derek Calloway had been in her life for 14 months. He was 34, she was 27, and the gap had felt meaningful to her at the start, in the way age gaps feel meaningful when you are young enough to confuse confidence with maturity. He had a good job in commercial real estate, a flat in a part of the city that required a waiting list, and a way of walking into a room that made people turn, not because he was loud, because he was certain. Nadia had been drawn to the certainty. She had spent most of her 20s in a state of low-grade uncertainty, the kind that hums under everything, and Derek had seemed like the antidote to that. He was sure of things. He made decisions without circling them for days. He booked restaurants without asking what she felt like. He knew what wine to order. He did not apologize for taking up space. She had loved all of that. For a while, it felt like standing next to a fire in winter. The first time he said something about her weight, she almost missed it. They were getting ready to go out, and she was standing in front of the wardrobe in a green dress she had bought 2 summers ago and still loved, and he had looked at her for a beat too long and said, casually, as if commenting on the weather outside, that she might want to wear something looser. He said it with a small smile that was supposed to soften it. It did not soften it. She had changed. She had told herself it was her own choice. She had worn the black top instead, and had spent the entire evening aware of the green dress hanging in the wardrobe at home like an unanswered question. That was month 4. By month 9, she had a list in her head, not written anywhere, just stored, the way you store things that are too sharp to touch directly. Comments about portions, questions about whether she was still going to the gym, a silence that lasted 2 full seconds when she mentioned wanting to try a new dessert place, a silence that said everything he was not saying out loud. She had spent months talking herself out of what she already knew. Cleo had known. Cleo had said very carefully, over coffee in month 10, that she thought Derek had a certain way of looking at Nadia that made Cleo uncomfortable. Nadia had defended him. She had said Cleo was reading too much into things. Cleo had nodded and said nothing more and paid for the coffee, which was how Nadia knew Cleo believed she was right and was choosing love over argument. The last conversation with Derek was not a fight. That was the thing she kept coming back to. It had not felt like a fight. There had been no raised voices, no accusations thrown across the room, No dramatic exit. He had simply sat down across from her at the kitchen table, folded his hands in a way that meant he had prepared what he was about to say, and told her that he had been doing a lot of thinking. He said they wanted different things. He said they were at different stages. He said, and this was the part that landed like something falling from a high shelf, that he needed someone who was more in line with his lifestyle. She had asked him what that meant. He had looked at the table for a moment, and then he had said it. Not the worst version of what he might have said, but clear enough. He said he was someone who cared about wellness, about keeping up with himself. He said he needed a partner who shared those values in a visible way. Visible. That word. She had understood exactly what visible meant. She had not cried. She had nodded very slowly, as if he had said something logical, and she had watched him stand up and collect the 3 things he kept at her apartment, and she had watched the door close behind him. Then she had sat down on the bathroom floor. She did not hate him. That was the complicated part. She had tried to work up to hatred over those 3 days because hatred felt useful, clean, something to hold. But what she actually felt was something older and quieter than hatred. She felt like she had believed in something that had turned out not to exist, and the absence of it was enormous. She felt like she had been weighed, not on a scale, by a person, and found to be less than enough. That was the thing about Derek's kind of cruelty. It arrived in reasoned sentences. It used words like wellness and values and visible. It gave itself the vocabulary of self-improvement so that you could not argue with it without sounding defensive. You could not say you were wounded without sounding like you had misunderstood something civilized. She understood everything. She went back to the kitchen. She picked up the takeout box and dropped it in the bin. She washed the counter. She boiled the kettle. She was standing with her tea when Cleo arrived, exactly 37 minutes after the single-word text, with a bag from the bakery around the corner, and an expression on her face that meant she was going to be furious on Nadia's behalf, and was only holding it back by sheer force of will. Cleo was 28, small, red-haired, and had a gift for walking into a room and immediately understanding everything that had happened in it. She looked at the clean counter. She looked at the hook by the door with no jacket on it. She set the bakery bag down and opened her arms, and Nadia walked into them. She did not cry. She would later, but not then. Then she just stood in her friend's arms in her clean kitchen and held her tea and let herself be held. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary Tuesday afternoon without her. Cars, people, weather, all of it continuing at the usual pace, indifferent to the fact that someone in a third-floor apartment was trying to figure out how to carry something she had not yet found the right word for. Cleo pulled back and looked at her face. "Tell me," Cleo said. Nadia told her. Cleo listened. She sat on the counter with a pastry in one hand and listened without interrupting, which was not her natural state, but which she managed, because she could see the shape of what Nadia was carrying. When Nadia finished, Cleo was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He put his jacket outside in the hall, didn't he?" It was not a question. "I put it outside," Nadia said. "It was his." Cleo nodded. She looked at the hook on the door. "Good," she said simply. She took a bite of the pastry. "Eat something, then we talk about what happens next." Nadia picked up a pastry. It was almond. Derek did not like almonds, and so she had stopped buying them. She ate the whole thing. That was day 3. That was where the rest of it began. The almond pastry was the first thing she had eaten in 2 days that had not been ordered out of obligation, consumed standing at the counter, and tasted like nothing. This one tasted like something. That felt important, though she could not have explained why to anyone without sounding dramatic. Cleo had ordered 3 of them. By the time they were gone, Nadia had said everything she needed to say, and Cleo had said far less than she was clearly thinking, which was its own kind of gift. What Cleo did say, near the end of that first evening, as she was pulling on her coat to leave, was this, that Nadia was the sharpest person she knew, and the most generous, and that someone who could not see that was not someone whose opinion of her body should carry any weight at all. She used the word weight, then she caught herself. Then she said, "You know what I mean." Nadia did know. She also knew that a person could understand something completely and still feel it. Story Ev Echo, Part 1 extension added. New word count. W.C. Meischweb, home/Claude, her ex dumped her for being chubby. The same man who threatened him is now begging to survive. Txt. She had not heard the name Marcus Webb in nearly a year when Cleo mentioned it. It was a Saturday, 6 weeks after Derek had collected his 3 items and his wool jacket from the hallway floor and walked out of her building and back into his curated life. 6 weeks of getting through days, not dramatically, not with visible suffering, just the ordinary hard work of moving through time when something has shifted in you and you haven't yet found where the new center is. Nadia had gone back to her job, a content editing role at a mid-size publishing company, with the focused efficiency of someone who had decided that competence was going to carry her for a while. She had sat in meetings and caught errors and responded to emails and eaten lunch at her desk and taken the train home and done it all again. She had been to Cleo's twice, and Cleo had come to hers once, and they had not talked about Derek after the first week because there was nothing left to say about Derek that would make anything better. She had, in the privacy of her own evenings, looked at herself in the full-length mirror in her bedroom and tried to see what Derek had seen. She had done this without cruelty. It had taken effort. But she had stood there and looked at herself honestly, a woman of 27 with a round face and brown skin and a body that had changed in various ways over various years, and she had asked herself sincerely what the problem was supposed to be. She had not found one. She had found a person, familiar, imperfect, hers. That was not a simple process. She was not going to claim it had taken 3 weeks to undo the accumulated weight of 14 months of small comments and 2-second silences. It had not. But she had started. That felt like something. It was on the Saturday, then, over coffee at a place near Cleo's flat, when Cleo mentioned Marcus. The name arrived in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, dropped in with the casual ease of someone who had been waiting for the right gap. Cleo mentioned that she had run into a mutual acquaintance, a woman named B who knew everyone in a loose, overlapping way that certain kinds of people know everyone, and that B had mentioned Marcus Webb was back in the city after 2 years working abroad. Nadia set her coffee cup down. "Back where exactly?" she asked. "Here," Cleo said. "Bia said he's got a place in Farlow Lane. Has been back about 4 months, apparently. She said he asked about you." Nadia looked out of the window at the street. A man was walking a dog that was clearly in charge of the walk. "He asked about me." That's what B said. Marcus Webb was not a complicated memory, but he was a layered one. She had known him first through other people, the way you often know people in your mid-20s, through the overlapping circles of shared friends and events, and the particular geography of a city where the interesting people all eventually end up in the same rooms. He was 31, 4 years older than her, and he worked in something connected to architecture and urban design that she had never fully understood, but that seemed to involve a great deal of international travel and conversations that went on long after the people around them had stopped following. She had liked him immediately and kept him at a careful distance for reasons she had not examined closely. He was the kind of person who paid attention in a way that made you feel slightly exposed, not unkindly, but completely. They had been at the same parties several times. They had had one proper conversation, long and wandering, about something that had started as a book and ended up as a discussion about what people do with the parts of themselves they can't make useful. She had thought about that conversation afterward in the way you think about a meal that was better than you expected. Then he had gone abroad, and Derek had appeared, and that was the year she had spent filling time with someone who made her feel certain in ways that had turned out to be a trap. She picked up her coffee. "It's fine," she said. "I'm not looking for anything." "I know," Cleo said, in a tone that meant she had heard that and was filing it for later. She did not think about Marcus Webb again for 3 days. Then she thought about him at a completely inconvenient moment, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon meeting, when someone was discussing pagination, and she caught herself wondering what his voice sounded like now. She had not heard it in over a year. She remembered it as measured, not slow, just sure of its own pace. She redirected her attention to pagination. On Thursday, her building had a leak. This was not related to anything. The building had a pipe problem on the floor above hers, and the property management company sent someone around to check all the units on her floor, and that someone brought a colleague. The colleague knocked on her door at 10 in the morning, apologized for the interruption, checked the ceiling in her bathroom and the one in her hallway, said everything looked fine, and asked her to report anything unusual. She said she would. The colleague was about to leave, then he stopped and said, with the slightly awkward expression of someone who had not planned to say anything personal, but had decided to anyway, that she was Nadia Osei, wasn't she? He had met her once, at a gathering at Bia's place, about 18 months ago. She looked at him. He was not especially tall, dark-haired, with a quality of stillness about him that she placed belatedly. "You work with Marcus Webb," she said. He smiled. "I do. He actually mentioned you last week. Said you lived on this street, actually." Bit of a coincidence. He shrugged in the way of someone who did not believe in coincidences but was being polite about it. "I'm Owen. Owen Pratt." She shook his hand. "Nice to meet you, Owen." Owen said it had been nice to meet her too. He said he would pass on her regards. She had not told him to pass on her regards. She said nothing to correct this. She closed the door and stood in her hallway with her hand against the wall and thought about what exactly the universe was doing. The following Monday, Marcus Webb was standing outside the coffee shop nearest to her office. He was not waiting for her. That was the first thing she understood, and it mattered, because the alternative would have been alarming. He was on his phone, standing just to the right of the entrance, and he looked up when she pushed the door open, and their eyes met, and he looked genuinely and slightly startled, which was an expression she had not expected to find on a face that was usually so composed. "Nadia," he said. "Marcus," she said. There was a pause, the good kind, the kind that happens when two people are trying to figure out which version of the situation they are in. "Owen told me you were on Garfield Street," he said. "I work 2 blocks from here." I know. She had not known that until Owen mentioned it, but she had looked it up. She was not going to say she had looked it up. He nodded slowly, as if this made sense. "Do you have a minute?" She had a deadline in 40 minutes. "Sure," she said. They went inside. He ordered black coffee. She ordered hers with oat milk and a small amount of the kind of sugar that she had stopped ordering in Derek's presence, and had reinstated the week after Derek left, quietly, like reclaiming a territory. They sat by the window. He looked at her in the direct way she remembered, not uncomfortable, just present. "It's been a while," he said. "Almost 2 years." "You look well," he said, and the way he said it was entirely ordinary, and contained no subtext and no audit, and no implication of anything other than what it was. A person telling another person they looked well. She had forgotten that was possible. "You too," she said. He did. He had a few more lines at the corners of his eyes. They suited him in the way that some things suit people without them doing anything to earn it. They talked for 25 minutes. It was easy. Easier than it should have been, given the gap, and easier than most conversations she had had in the past 6 weeks. He told her about the project that had brought him abroad and why he had come back. She told him about her job, a new imprint they were launching, a manuscript she was currently working on that was keeping her busy. He did not ask about Derek. She did not mention Derek. At the end of the 25 minutes, he said they should do this properly sometime, and she said yes, and they exchanged numbers in the way of people who both intend to follow through, which was a different texture from the way people exchange numbers when they both know they won't. She walked to work. The deadline came and went. The afternoon passed. On the train home, she looked at the city moving past the window and felt something she had not felt in 6 weeks. Not happiness exactly, something smaller and more reliable than happiness. She felt like herself. She felt like herself, that had existed before 14 months of slow, quiet reduction. It was a beginning. She was careful not to make too much of it, but it was a beginning. The complication arrived 4 days later, and it arrived, as complications so often do, through someone who had no idea they were carrying it. Cleo called on a Friday evening, and when Nadia picked up, Cleo said, before she had even said hello, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise not to do anything strange." Nadia sat down on the sofa. "Tell me." "So you know how B knows everyone," Cleo said. "Yes. Bia told me something today. About Derek." Cleo paused. "About Derek and Marcus." Nadia was quiet. "They know each other," Cleo said. "Or they knew each other. Bia said something happened about 8 months ago. She doesn't know all the details. But apparently Marcus said something to Derek. Or did something. She wasn't clear. But she said Derek came out of it looking very small, and has not been near Marcus's social circle since." Nadia said nothing for a moment. "How does B know this?" she asked. "B knows everyone," Cleo said simply, as if this were sufficient, which in B's case it generally was. After she hung up, Nadia sat with her phone in her hand and looked at the wall. 8 months ago, she had still been with Derek. She had been in month 6 of being with Derek, which was the month of the 2-second silence when she mentioned the dessert place. She had been in the thick of it. And somewhere in the geography of that time, Marcus Webb, who had been abroad, had come back briefly, or heard something, or known something, and had said something to Derek that had made Derek look very small. She had not asked him to. She had not told him anything. She had not spoken to Marcus in over a year at that point. She turned this over carefully. She did not know how to feel about it. She was not sure she was allowed to feel good about it, because feeling good about it meant she approved of things being done on her behalf without her knowledge or consent, and she did not approve of that in principle. She was also not sure she was allowed to feel bad about it, because in some very quiet and not quite acknowledged corner of herself, knowing that Derek had been made to feel small, at least once, by someone who had seen clearly what Derek had done, was not the worst thing she had heard in a while. She went to the kitchen. She made pasta. She ate at the table instead of standing at the counter. She poured a glass of the wine she had been saving for a reason she had not yet identified, and decided this was close enough to a reason. She had questions for Marcus Webb. She was going to have to figure out how to ask them. Story of Echo Part 2 added, total word count, WC Maish W de home/Claude. Her ex dumped her for being chubby. The same man who threatened him is now begging to survive.txt. She did not ask them right away. The following week went by without her messaging him, and then the week after that. Not out of fear. Out of something more careful than fear. She was aware that she was in a fragile state, not broken, but still in the process of reassembling herself, and she did not want to reach for Marcus Webb until she was reaching from a solid place, and not from the wounded one she was still quietly climbing out of. She went back to the gym. Not the one Derek had preferred, a corporate place with branded equipment and mirrors everywhere. A smaller one, a 20-minute walk from her flat. The kind with mismatched equipment and a notice board with paper flyers for yoga classes, and a woman named Dolores at the front desk, who remembered everyone's name. She went on a Tuesday morning, her day off, and she did not think about how she looked while she was there. She thought about how she felt. She felt ordinary. She felt like a body in motion. She felt, by the time she left, like she had done something for herself, rather than to herself. She went back on Thursday. She went back the following Tuesday. At work, she finished the manuscript she had been working on. It was a memoir by a woman who had spent years in a difficult marriage, and had spent more years after it figuring out who she was underneath the adaptation. Nadia had read it 3 times by the end, and each time she had found something different in it, which was the mark of something true. She wrote her editorial notes and sent them, and spent a moment sitting with the strangeness of working so closely with someone else's survival, while quietly doing her own. Cleo noticed the change before Nadia could name it. "You seem different," Cleo said over the phone one evening. "Not better or worse, just different. Less like you're holding something." "I think I put some of it down," Nadia said. "Good," Cleo said. "Keep going." 3 weeks after the coffee shop, Nadia texted Marcus. She kept it simple. She said she had been thinking about their conversation, and she had a question she wanted to ask him in person if he was available. He replied within the hour, "Tuesday at the same coffee shop if that worked." She said yes. She wore the green dress. She had not worn it since the night Derek had suggested something looser. She had looked at it several times in the weeks since, hanging in the wardrobe like a thing that needed to be decided about. And on the morning before she met Marcus, she took it off the hanger and put it on, and stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself in it. It still fit. It had always fit. The question had never been whether it fit. She went to the coffee shop. Marcus was already there. He looked up when she came in, and something moved across his expression before it settled back into its usual steadiness. He stood up. "You look great," he said. "Thank you," she said. She sat down. She had ordered her coffee ahead of time, and it was waiting on the table, oat milk, and the exact right amount of sugar. They talked for a few minutes about normal things. Then she set her cup down and said, "Bia told Cleo something." He went still, not defensive, not apologetic, just still, in the way of someone who has been waiting for a question and is deciding how to answer it. "About 8 months ago," she said. "You and Derek." He looked at her steadily. "Yes," he said. "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said that he had known Derek Calloway for a few years, through professional overlap, and that he had never liked him, but had managed the acquaintance. The way you manage acquaintances you don't like, with minimal contact and polite distance. When he came back to the city briefly, 8 months ago, for a short project, he had run into Derek at an event, and Derek had said something, at that event, in a group of people, about a woman he was seeing. He had not named her, but the description was specific enough, and the language used was specific enough, that Marcus had known immediately who Derek was talking about. Derek had made a comment, about a woman he was with, about her body. He had made it as a joke, the kind of small cruelty disguised as humor that certain people deploy publicly because the group's laughter is the permission they're looking for. The group had laughed. Marcus had not. Marcus had waited until the group dispersed. Then he had taken Derek aside. "What did you say to him?" Nadia asked. Marcus looked at his coffee. "I told him that the way he spoke about the woman he was with in that room told me more about him than it told me about her, and that the people he was trying to impress in that room had now heard it too, and would remember it. Not about her, about him." Nadia said nothing. "I also told him," Marcus continued, carefully, "that there were people in that room who could make his professional life considerably more difficult, and that he had just demonstrated, publicly, exactly what kind of person he was, and that I would be remembering it." The coffee shop was warm. The window was slightly steamed. "He didn't know you were seeing me," Nadia said. "Not at that moment. I understood it afterward from how he responded." She looked at him. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No," he said, "you didn't." "I didn't tell you anything about what was happening." "No," he said again. "You didn't." He met her eyes. "I heard something I couldn't unhear. I said what I said. I understand if you're angry about it." She was not angry. She had thought she might be angry, and she was checking, and she was not. What she was something more tangled than anger. She was sitting with the fact that someone had seen something she had been invisible inside of, and had said something about it, without theater, without making it about himself, and had then gone back abroad and not mentioned it to her, and had not held it as a favor she owed him. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. He thought about this for a moment. "Because it wasn't mine to tell. You were in a relationship. What he said in that room was about him. What you did with it was always going to be your decision." She looked out of the window. "I know that might not be enough of an explanation," he said. "It's enough," she said. And then, because she needed to say something honest, she said, "I think I would have stayed with him longer if I had known. I would have felt like someone had acted for me, and I would have needed to prove something." "I don't know if that makes sense." "It makes sense," he said. Outside, the city went about its Saturday afternoon. Inside, two people sat with something complicated between them that was also, underneath all its complications, something quite simple. "I'm glad you said it," she said finally. "I'm glad he was made to understand that someone saw it." Marcus nodded. He did not look relieved exactly. He looked like someone who had been carrying something small, and had finally been allowed to set it down. They ordered more coffee. The conversation shifted, moved away from Derek and into other things, the way a river moves around a stone. They talked about her work and his work, and about a film they had both seen that they disagreed about in an interesting way. She told him about the memoir. He told her about a project in Lisbon he was considering. When she left, he walked her to the corner and they said goodbye with the ease of people who knew they would see each other again. She walked back to her flat in the early afternoon light, green dress and all, and she felt the day settling around her. There were no fireworks, no revelations delivered at volume, just a woman walking home in a dress she had always loved, through a city that was the same city it had been at the worst of it, feeling like she had moved from one room of herself into another and found it was larger than she remembered. Derek Calloway had no idea any of this had happened. He was living his curated life, booking his restaurants without asking, ordering the right wine, keeping up with his wellness and his visible values, entirely unaware that the woman he had discarded so tidily was reconstructing herself, piece by piece, in the ordinary dailiness of a city he shared with her. He did not know yet what was coming. Story of Echo Part 2 extended. Total word count, WC, W-home, was home, Claude / her ex dumped her for being chubby. The same man who threatened him is now begging to survive.txt. 2 months passed the way good months pass, unspectacularly and completely. Nadia got a promotion. Not a dramatic one, not the kind with a speech and a cake in the break room. She was offered the lead editorial role on a new imprint the company was launching, a line dedicated to personal narrative nonfiction, and she said yes immediately, and then sat in her office for 5 full minutes, absorbing what yes meant. It meant more responsibility, more ownership, more creative authority, more of the kind of work she was good at and had spent years being trusted with only partially. She called Cleo. Cleo screamed. Then Cleo asked if she had told Marcus. Then Cleo said nothing further on the subject and redirected the conversation smoothly, which was Cleo's way of acknowledging she had noticed something without forcing a conversation Nadia had not opened yet. She had told Marcus. She had texted him, and he had responded with 2 sentences, both of them specific, and both of them about the work, rather than the achievement, which was exactly right. He understood why she cared about it without needing her to explain it. That was the quality she kept finding in him, that careful attention to what things actually meant rather than what they were supposed to look like. They had been seeing each other regularly for almost 2 months, and she still could not name what they were without the name feeling like a reduction. They met for coffee and for long afternoon walks that covered a significant amount of the city. He had cooked for her twice in his flat in Farlow Lane, a place that was full of good light and books arranged in the kind of loose order that meant they were actually being read. She had made dinner for him once at hers. He had stayed late both times and left before it became something she had to name. There was an agreement between them that did not need to be spoken. They were moving towards something at the pace that made sense for the particular materials they were working with, which included her recent history and her still-in-progress reassembly, and the fact that Marcus was a man who did not push, genuinely did not push, in a way that had taken her a while to fully trust. She trusted it now. Her body had been on her mind, not in the way it had been on her mind during Derek, when she had been aware of it as a liability, something that required management and concealment, and constant low-level apology, differently, more honestly. She was aware of it as the thing she lived in. She had gone to the gym 20 times in the past 2 months, and she had not weighed herself once. That was a decision she had made after a specific Thursday morning, when she had stood on the scale out of habit, and watched the number, and felt the familiar calculation beginning, and had thought, no. She had stepped off the scale, and put it in the cupboard under the sink, and closed the door. What she paid attention to instead was how she felt, whether she was sleeping, whether the walking was making her feel loose and present in the world, whether the food she was eating was food she wanted, and food that kept her going, and food that, on occasion, tasted like something worth the time to eat. She had started buying almonds again. That was its own small satisfaction. The memoir she had edited had been accepted with enthusiastic letters from 3 different reviewers and was going into production. The author, a woman named Gloria, had sent her a note that was 2 pages long and handwritten, and that Nadia had read 3 times. Gloria had said that Nadia had seen her on the page in ways she had stopped expecting anyone to see her off it. Nadia had kept the letter in her desk drawer. She was building something, several somethings, simultaneously. That felt right. Marcus came to a work event with her in the middle of the 2nd month, a small launch for a book by a poet who was a friend of a colleague, held at a bookshop in the old part of the city, the kind of bookshop with uneven floorboards and a cat, and shelves that required a ladder. She had asked him casually, and he had said yes casually, and they had gone and stood together in the warm press of people who were happy to be gathered around language, and she had introduced him to her colleagues without over-explaining who he was, and he had been easy and good in the room in the particular way of people who are confident enough not to need to be impressive. On the walk back, it was cold enough to see breath. He had bought her a copy of the poetry collection. She had not asked for it. He had simply bought it while she was talking to someone, and pressed it into her hands when she came back. "You kept looking at the display," he said, when she looked at the book and then at him. She had kept looking at the display. She had not thought he had noticed. She stood on the pavement in the cold with the book in her hand and looked at him, and he looked back at her, and she thought, there it is. There is what I was looking for and did not find in the direction I was looking. She did not say that out loud. She said thank you. He said don't mention it. They kept walking. That night, back at her flat, she sat with the poetry collection and read the first 20 pages and marked 3 lines in pencil that felt true, and she thought about how different it was to be known by degrees, to have someone notice small things, the display you kept looking at, the coffee you actually want, the conversation you needed to have about something difficult, small, precise attentions, accumulating. Derek had been large and certain, and had paid attention in the way that made her feel observed. Marcus paid attention in the way that made her feel seen. She had not understood until recently that those were entirely different things. The week things shifted was the week she ran into Owen Pratt again. Owen worked with Marcus at the design firm, and she had seen him twice since the morning of the apartment leak, briefly and in passing. He was friendly and uncomplicated, and had a habit of saying exactly what was on his mind, without apparent anxiety about how it would land, which was either refreshing or alarming depending on the day. She ran into him at the market near her flat on a Thursday afternoon, and he fell into step beside her with the ease of a man who treated the world as a place full of people he already liked. They walked one full aisle together, and he told her about a project he and Marcus were working on, a public space renovation in a neighborhood Nadia knew well, and she asked interested questions, and he gave interesting answers, and at the end of the aisle he said something that stopped her. He said that Marcus had turned down a very significant contract in Copenhagen last month. She stopped walking. "Copenhagen?" she said. Owen looked at her with the expression of someone who had said a thing he assumed she already knew. "Yeah, the Sorensen brief. It was a real opportunity. He turned it down in January." "Why?" she said, though she had an idea. Owen looked at her with the careful neutrality of a person who liked both people in a situation. "He said the timing wasn't right," Owen said, "that there were things here worth staying for." He said it plainly, without inflection, and then he said he had to get going and waved and left her standing in the market aisle holding a paper bag of vegetables and understanding something she had been allowing herself not to fully understand. Marcus had turned down a contract in Copenhagen. He had been home 4 months before she ran into him outside the coffee shop. The Copenhagen brief, if Owen's timeline was right, had been in January. She had met Marcus in February. He had already decided to stay before he had seen her again. She was not the reason he stayed, but he had stayed. She thought about that all the way home. She set the vegetables on the counter and stood in her kitchen and thought about a man who paid attention to things and made decisions without broadcasting them and did not use what he had done as currency or leverage. The contrast with Derek settled into the room like something being finally measured correctly. She picked up her phone. She did not text Marcus about the Copenhagen thing. She needed to figure out how to sit with information she had not been meant to have and decide what to do with it. But she texted him the name of a restaurant she had been wanting to try and asked if Saturday worked. He replied in 4 minutes. "Saturday works perfectly." She put the phone down. She cooked the vegetables. She ate at the table. She poured 1 glass of wine and drank it slowly, reading the poetry collection, marking another line, the one about choosing the room you stay in like choosing the life you mean. She read it twice. Outside, the city was doing all the things cities do at 8 on a Thursday evening. Lit windows, the sound of a bus, someone's music from a floor above. Ordinary, continuous, hers. Saturday came. They went to the restaurant. It was the kind of place that took food seriously, without taking itself seriously. Small tables and an open kitchen, and a menu that changed with what was available. They ate slowly and talked through the meal about everything that had been accumulating in the weeks between their conversations, and it felt like a conversation that had been going on for longer than the months of it. Toward the end of the evening, with small cups of coffee on the table between them, she said, "Owen told me about Copenhagen." Marcus looked at her. He did not look surprised. He did not look caught. He just looked at her, with the full attention of someone who had known this moment would come, and had decided not to run from it. "He mentioned it," she said, "the Sorensen brief." "It wasn't the right time," Marcus said. "Why?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking. "Because I had been away a long time," he said. "Because there were things I had left unfinished. Professionally, personally." He looked at the table, then back at her. "And because Bia had mentioned you were in a difficult situation, and I wanted to be around in case the difficult situation resolved itself." She stared at him. "That's an enormous thing to not mention," she said. "I know. You were home for 4 months before we ran into each other." "I know. You didn't contact me. I knew you were still with Derek until February," he said. "I was not going to insert myself into that. That was yours to navigate." He met her eyes. "I was just here." She sat with that for a long moment. The restaurant was warm. The sound of other people's dinners moved around them. She looked at this man, this careful, attentive, quiet man, who had come home, and turned down a contract and waited, not waiting for her exactly, just being present in the vicinity of her life, in case she needed someone to be present. She did not know what to do with that. She knew it was not a small thing. She knew it was the kind of thing that required a response that matched it. "You should have told me," she said. "Yes," he said simply. "I should have." She nodded. She turned the coffee cup in its saucer. "I'm glad you're here," she said finally. "I want to be clear about that. I'm glad you're here." He looked at her, and the steadiness that was characteristic of him softened for a moment into something more open. "So am I," he said. They split the bill. He walked her home. At her door he stopped, and she looked up at him, and he said quietly that he thought she was the most genuinely interesting person he had spent time with in a very long while, and that he hoped she already knew that. She had not known that. She was beginning to. She said good night. She went inside. She stood in her hallway with her back against the closed door and looked at the hook where Derek's jacket had not hung for months, and she felt the apartment around her, hers, entirely and only hers, and everything in it chosen, and nothing in it apologizing for itself. She smiled, not for anyone, just because it was there. Story of Echo, Part 3 complete. Total word count, WC-W, home/Claude. Her ex dumped her for being chubby. The same man who threatened him is now begging to survive. TXT. Derek Calloway's problem began, as most serious problems do, without him realizing it was a problem at all. It started in early March, approximately 5 months after he had sat across from Nadia at her kitchen table and spoken his measured, reasonable sentences, and walked out of her flat and back into his certain life. He had not thought about her much since then, that was the honest truth. He had filed her away in the particular folder where he kept things that had not worked out the way he intended, a folder he did not open, a folder he kept quite tidy by not allowing himself to examine its contents. He had moved forward. He had gone on several dates. He had met a woman named Priya at an industry event and taken her to dinner 3 times and found her very agreeable and very slim, and had thought, briefly, that this was what he had been looking for. Then Priya had said something at their 4th dinner that made it clear she had thoughts about things, loud and specific thoughts, and he had found this less agreeable and had not called her again. He was still looking. He told himself he was being selective. He told himself he had standards, and that having standards was what separated serious people from people who settled. He had not connected the quiet shift in his professional world to anything in particular, not at first. He worked in commercial real estate, a world governed by relationships, by the kind of long institutional trust that built over years of shared deals and shared rooms, and shared knowledge about who could be relied upon. He knew a great many people. He was known by a great many people. He was 34 and considered himself on a good trajectory, and had no real reason to doubt it. The first sign was small enough to dismiss, a referral that did not materialize. He had been expecting a recommendation from a man named Colin Briggs, a senior figure in the city's development community who had been, in Derek's assessment, a reliable ally. Colin had mentioned him for a particular contract in January. Then in February, the contract had gone elsewhere, and Colin had been apologetic but vague about the reason. Derek had moved on. Contracts were lost. It happened. The second sign was less easy to dismiss. There was a gathering in March, a dinner for 20 people who mattered in interconnected ways to the kind of business Derek was in, and he had not been invited. He knew about it because someone mentioned it, casually and with apparent surprise that Derek had not been there, and Derek had said he had had a prior engagement and moved the conversation along with a steady hand. But he had gone home that evening and sat with the sharp and unfamiliar sensation of having been left out of a room he had assumed he belonged in. He made calls, carefully. He was careful about the calls because he did not want to appear anxious, and appearing anxious in his world was one of the few things that could accelerate exactly what you were anxious about. He asked around with the studied lightness of a man who was simply keeping up with things. What he gathered, in pieces, through conversations that were themselves carefully navigated, was that something had changed in the atmosphere around him. Nothing definitive, nothing stated, just a degree of coolness where there had been warmth, a hesitation where there had been ease, the kind of thing that is invisible to most people and only visible to someone who has spent years reading the temperature of rooms. He did not understand it, not yet. He went to an event in April, a launch event at a gallery space near the river, The kind of event where the real purpose is not the thing being launched but the conversations that happen on the margins. He worked the room with his usual confidence. He was good at this. He could talk to anyone and make them feel they had his full attention, and leave them with the impression that he was someone worth staying connected to. He was halfway through the room when he saw Marcus Webb. He had known Marcus for 3 years in the way that people know people in interlocking professional circles. He had not liked him. Specifically, Marcus had a quality of assessment about him that Derek had always found slightly adversarial, as if he were being measured against a standard Derek could not identify. He had managed this by keeping their interactions brief and professional. He had not seen Marcus since that evening 8 months ago, the one at the other gathering, when Marcus had pulled him aside and said what he had said. Derek had thought about that conversation a number of times. It had not sat well with him. He had told himself that Marcus had overreacted, that what he had said at the gathering was just a comment, just a moment of candor between people who all understood each other, and that Marcus had made it into something it wasn't. He had pushed it down into the same folder as Nadia and kept the folder shut. Seeing Marcus across the gallery, he felt the folder opening without his permission. Marcus was talking to 2 people Derek recognized. One of them was Colin Briggs. The other was a woman named Harriet, who ran one of the most significant property development consultancies in the city, and whose opinion moved things in ways that were difficult to trace, but impossible to ignore. They were laughing about something. Marcus had said something and both Colin and Harriet were laughing, and it was the comfortable laughter of people who were at ease with one another, and it told Derek, in the immediate and unambiguous language of rooms like this, something he had not understood before. Marcus was not a peripheral figure in the world Derek moved in. He was central to it. He had been absent for 2 years and had returned and had slid into the center of it in a way that Derek had not tracked, because Derek had not thought to track him. He understood, in that moment across the gallery, the shape of what had happened. He stood very still for a moment. Then he picked up a drink from a passing tray and moved toward a different part of the room and spent the rest of the evening being exactly as he always was, charming, confident, attentive, and felt the effort of it in a way he had not felt it in years. He went home. He sat in his flat, the good flat in the good part of the city, and he thought. He had always operated on the assumption that his confidence was a resource that could not be depleted. He had walked through rooms and collected whatever he needed and moved on, and the rooms had always been there to go back to. He was beginning to understand that rooms have memory, that the people in them remember things. Marcus had said, 8 months ago, that the people in that room would remember. Derek had thought at the time that this was a threat he could absorb. He understood now that it had not been a threat. It had been an accurate description of what was going to happen. He spent a week trying to decide what to do. He drew up an internal account of his assets, the contacts who were still warm, the relationships that still held, the work he had done that spoke for itself. He reviewed his situation without sentimentality and found that his situation, while not catastrophic, was deteriorating in ways that would become significant if the trend continued. He needed access to the part of his world that had gone cold. To restore it, he needed someone who was currently warm in those circles to open a door. He circled the problem from several angles. He considered going to Colin directly, but Colin had been evasive, which meant Colin was not going to be forthcoming. He considered Harriet, but he had no existing relationship with Harriet that could carry the weight of what he needed. He came back, each time, to Marcus. And each time he came back to Marcus, he came back also to a fact he had been trying to avoid. That what Marcus had said to him 8 months ago was not just about a comment at a party. It was about Nadia, and that there was a possible path through Marcus that ran directly through whatever Marcus felt about Nadia. He sat with this for several days. He did not want to contact Nadia. Pride made that difficult. He had been the one who ended things. He had done it cleanly and rationally, and he had told himself she was fine, or would be fine, because practical people moved on and she had always seemed practical. He had not thought about her much. He was not used to thinking about people he had left behind. But the logic of his situation kept returning him to the same conclusion. He opened his phone. He found her number, which he had not deleted, and he looked at it for a long moment, and then he began to type. He spent 40 minutes drafting the message. He wrote 7 versions and deleted 6. He was good with language professionally, and he brought that skill to the task in a way that felt, even as he was doing it, like a fairly large comment on his own character. He was constructing an apology the way he would construct a pitch, testing each sentence for the effect it would have, angling for the response he needed. The final message said that he had been thinking about how things ended between them, and that he had not been fair in how he handled things, and that he owed her an apology for that. He said he hoped she was well. He said he would like to talk if she was open to it. He read it over twice. It was good. It was almost convincing. He sent it. Then he waited. He waited through Thursday and into Friday, checking his phone with a frequency that he found humiliating, and managed by telling himself he was just being thorough. Nothing came. He waited through Friday evening. He went to a restaurant on Saturday with a colleague and checked his phone twice in the bathroom and felt the checking as a small indignity. Nothing came. On Sunday, he checked one more time. Still nothing. He put his phone in his jacket pocket and stood at the window of his good flat in his good part of the city and looked at the street below and felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular unease of a man who has sent something into the world and found that the world has not responded. He was not used to silence as an answer. He had always been the one who decided whether to respond, whether to engage, whether someone's reach in his direction warranted his attention. The silence coming back at him from Nadia's phone had a texture he had not anticipated. It felt like being left outside a room. He told himself she had probably not seen it. He told himself she was busy. He told himself she might respond yet. He was a man of reasons, and the reasons kept arriving, neatly and urgently, doing the work that his own uncertainty was not equipped to do. What he did not tell himself, because it would have required a kind of honesty he had not yet developed, was that perhaps the silence was not a delay. Perhaps the silence was the answer, clearly stated by someone who had learned to say things in the quietest and most final possible way. He had taught her that. She had learned from the best. Story of Echo Part 4 complete. Total word count. WC, Maisha's W Bast. Home. Claude. Her ex dumped her for being chubby. The same man who threatened him is now begging to survive. TXT. Nadia saw the message on a Thursday morning, standing in her kitchen with her first cup of coffee, still in the clothes she slept in, hair loose, half a piece of toast in her other hand. She read it once. Then she put her phone face down on the counter and ate the rest of her toast. She had not heard from Derek in 5 months. His name on her screen had produced a physical sensation she could not quite classify, somewhere between recognition and fatigue, the way you feel when you see a place you used to live and remember not the good times or the bad times but just the sheer amount of effort the place required. She turned the phone over and read the message again. It was well written, she noticed that. It had the structure of a genuine apology, acknowledgement, regret, an expression of goodwill. He had put time into it. She could feel the time in it, the careful positioning of each sentence. She had spent 14 months with this man and she knew his language, knew how he assembled words when he wanted something, and she could see the architecture of this message in a way she would not have been able to see it a year ago. It was not, primarily, an apology. It was a request. The apology was the wrapper. Inside the wrapper was a man who needed something. She did not know what he needed, but she knew the shape of it, the reaching toward her as a pathway to something else, because Derek Calloway did not reach toward people without reason. He had never been a man of sentimental gestures. If he was reaching now, something had shifted in his world, and the shift had made her seem useful. She showed Marcus the message that evening. They were at his flat, the one with the good light, and the books arranged in the loose and honest order of a person who actually read them. She had cooked, a thing that had surprised her at first, that she wanted to cook for him. She had cooked for Derek twice in 14 months, and both times had felt the unspoken evaluation of each dish. She cooked for Marcus without that feeling. She cooked and he sat at the kitchen counter and talked to her while she did it, and poured the wine, and occasionally said something about what she was doing that made it clear he was paying attention. And it was so different from the other version of this scene that she had lived in for over a year that she had nearly laughed about it out loud on more than one occasion. After dinner, they were on his sofa with the remains of the evening between them, and she picked up her phone and found the message and handed it to him without saying anything. He read it. He set the phone face down on the cushion beside him. Slow, deliberate, the face-down gesture matching exactly what she had done that morning in her kitchen, and she noticed the parallel without saying anything about it. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "Then that's what you should do," he said. He did not say anything else about it. He did not speculate about why Derek had written. He did not offer to handle it. He did not perform indignation or territorial feeling. He simply accepted her answer and moved on, the way someone does when they trust that the person they are with has reached the right conclusion for the right reasons. She appreciated the absence of theater more than she could have said. She did not respond to Derek's message. She had already decided that in the kitchen that morning, before she had finished the toast, some decisions make themselves while you are looking the other way. Derek sent a follow-up message 9 days later. This one was shorter, more direct. He said he was wondering if she had received the first message, and he said there was something he wanted to speak with her about that she might find relevant. He said he thought they could help each other. There it was. She had been waiting for the help each other. Now it was there, explicit and undisguised, and reading it produced in her not anger, not satisfaction, but a very quiet sense of confirmation. She had known the shape of it. The shape had now become the thing itself. She showed Marcus this one too. He read it. "He's going to contact me eventually," Marcus said. She looked at him. "You know what this is about?" "I have an idea," he said. He said it without heat. Not cold either, just accurate. The world he operates in has gotten smaller. I think he's been putting together why. She had a question she had not asked yet. She asked it now. "Did you intend for it to affect his work?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking with the honest care she had come to recognize in him. "I didn't set out to," he said finally. "What I said to him in that room was true. The people there would remember. They did. I didn't engineer what happened after. I just stopped vouching for him to people who asked, and I stopped being in rooms where his name could be elevated." He looked at her. "Is that too much?" She thought about it genuinely. She did not reach for the answer that would make her seem magnanimous, or the one that would make her seem vindicated. She sat with the actual question. "No," she said. "It's not too much. You didn't fabricate anything about him. You just stopped covering for something you'd seen." Marcus nodded slowly. "I saw something that needed to be seen," he said. "I let it be seen." "That's enough," she said. "That's actually enough." They sat with that for a moment. "When he contacts you," she said, "what will you say?" Marcus turned his coffee cup in his hands, a gesture she had noticed he made when he was choosing his words carefully. "I'll say no," he said, "and I'll be very calm about it." She believed him. He was very good at saying no, in ways that took all the drama out of a situation, while leaving the substance of the refusal completely intact. Derek contacted Marcus on a Wednesday. He sent a professional message through a shared industry platform, correctly formatted, using the language of a business request rather than a personal one. He said he was aware that Marcus had recently returned to the city and that he would welcome the chance to reconnect over coffee, as he felt there were potential synergies in their respective areas of work. He said he had always respected Marcus's professional acumen. Marcus read the message to Nadia on Thursday evening. His voice was entirely even. She listened. Then she said, "Synergies." "Yes," Marcus said. They sat with that for a beat. "What are you going to say?" she asked. "I'm going to say that I'm flattered, but I don't think our work overlaps in ways that would make a meeting useful at this time." "That's it?" "That's it," he said. She turned that over. "No explanation." "Explanations give people something to argue with," he said. "I'm not interested in arguing." She thought about that, about the precision of it. You leave no door ajar and there is nothing for the other person to push against. You are simply and completely unavailable, and the unavailability has no edges to find a grip on. Derek Calloway was about to learn what it felt like to reach for a door and find that the door was not there. Marcus sent the reply that evening. Polite, measured, final. Derek's response came within the hour. It was longer than Marcus's message and carried, beneath its professional surface, the faint and unmistakable pressure of a man who was trying to reopen a door that had just been closed. He said he understood Marcus might be busy, but that the matter he had in mind was of some significance, and he would be very glad if Marcus could spare even 30 minutes. Marcus read it to her over the phone. "What are you going to say?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "I've said what I have to say." The silence that followed Derek's second message lasted 3 days. Then Derek sent one more. This one was stripped of professional framing entirely. It said, in plain and notably unpolished language, that he knew things had not ended well between them, and that he took responsibility for his part in that. He said he was in a difficult position professionally, and that he believed Marcus had played a role in that, and he wanted the opportunity to address it directly, and clear the air. He said he hoped they could be reasonable adults about this. Marcus let Nadia read it herself. She sat with his phone in her hands and read it twice. Reasonable adults. She thought about the last time she had seen Derek, across her kitchen table, his hands folded, his voice measured, his sentences about wellness and lifestyle and visibility. She thought about all the ways he had asked her to make herself smaller, and had dressed the asking in the language of personal values and mutual fit. She thought about the night she had stood in front of her wardrobe in the green dress, and changed because of 2 seconds of silence from a man whose silence she had decided to translate. She set the phone down. "He thinks this is a misunderstanding," she said. "He thinks if he explains himself, the problem gets fixed." "Yes," Marcus said. "He doesn't understand that there is no misunderstanding," she said. "That's the thing. There is nothing to clear up. You saw something true. The people in that room saw something true. He didn't make a mistake people can forgive. He showed people who he was." Marcus looked at her. "Yes," he said. "He could have been kind," she said. "Not with heat, with the flatness of something that had been looked at from every angle and concluded. That was always an option. At every point, it was an option. He chose something else." Marcus did not respond. He let her words be what they were. She picked up the phone and handed it back to him. "Don't reply," she said. "Not because he doesn't deserve a response, just because the silence is more accurate." Marcus took the phone. He held it for a moment. Then he set it on the table and left Derek's message unanswered, and the conversation moved on to other things, the way conversations do when the important part is finished. Derek sent one final message 2 weeks later. This one went to mutual acquaintances, carefully worded, professionally framed, asking if anyone could provide an introduction to Marcus Webb in a more direct capacity. He said he believed there had been a professional misunderstanding he would like to address. The acquaintances, one by one, did not provide the introduction. They did not do this dramatically. There was no meeting, no collective decision. They simply each found that when they thought about it, they were not in a position to help. Some of them had heard things, in the casual way of interconnected people, about the kind of person Derek was in certain rooms. Some of them had seen things themselves, in small ways, over years, and had noted them. Some of them simply trusted Marcus Webb's assessment of a situation, having trusted it before, and found it reliable. Derek's world did not collapse. He still had his flat. He still had his work, reduced in scope but functional. He still had his certainty, though it was finding less to anchor to than it once had. He would rebuild, probably. People like Derek generally found a way to reassemble their circumstances, because confidence of a certain kind is a survival skill, even when it is also a flaw. But he would rebuild without the room he had assumed was always going to be his, and he would not understand fully why, because the people who had closed it had not told him they were closing it. They had simply been unavailable, one at a time, over months, until the shape of the unavailability became undeniable. He had once made a woman feel that her worth could be measured in a visible way, and the measurement had not gone in her favor, and he had said it in a room full of people who had heard him. The room had remembered. Nadia did not know most of the details of how Derek's world was rearranging itself. She knew enough from Marcus to understand the general shape of it, and she did not spend much time on the details because Derek Calloway had stopped being the story she was in. She was in a different story. She was leading a new imprint at work, and 3 weeks into the formal role, she had already commissioned 2 projects that she believed in completely. She was going to the gym at Dolores's place on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and occasionally Saturdays when the week required it. She was buying almonds. She was reading the poetry collection Marcus had given her, and marking lines in pencil that felt true, and the collection was now thoroughly marked because there were a great many things in it that felt true. She and Marcus had, without announcing it, become the kind of people who made plans in weeks rather than days, and who had standing arrangements, and who existed in each other's lives with the ease of 2 people who had decided, separately and then together, that this was where they wanted to be. They did not make a large event of it. They were not large event people. There was an evening in May when they were walking along the river after dinner, the city lit and moving on the water, and she had taken his hand in the particular casual way of someone who was not making a statement, but simply reaching for what was there, and he had held it in the particular way of someone who had been hoping it would arrive, and had not wanted to reach first. They walked for a long time. They did not have to talk. That was part of it. She thought, Walking. About the woman who had sat on the bathroom floor 3 days after a man left her apartment, back against the tub, knees pulled to her chest, trying to figure out what to do with the fact of being found insufficient. She thought about the almond pastry, about the hook with no jacket on it, about the green dress going back on the hanger and then, months later, coming off it again. She thought about what it had cost to put it back on and walk out the door in it. Not much. In the end, not much at all. The dress had always fit. The mirror had always showed the same person. All that had changed was who was in the room when she stood in front of it. Now the person in the room was someone who paid attention to what she looked at. Who noticed when she kept returning to a display case? Who bought the book without being asked and did not mention the buying of it until she asked, and then did not make a story of it? They reached the end of the riverside walk, where the path turned back toward the city. The lights were bright. The night was cool. Somewhere behind them, a city was full of people making their way through their various days. Some of them toward things, some of them away from them, most of them in both directions at once. She stopped walking. She looked at him. "I'm glad you stayed," she said. He looked at her. The evening suited him, the way good light suits certain faces, and he was looking at her with the full and settled attention that had always made her feel both slightly exposed and completely seen. "So am I," he said. They turned and walked back toward the city, her hand in his, the lights on the water, the ordinary and enormous fact of being somewhere that felt right. Derek Calloway, at that precise moment, was at home in his good flat, reading an email from a colleague about a project he had been passed over for, trying to locate where the error in his calculations had been, searching for the moment he could have done something differently that would have produced a different result. He was going to search for a long time. The error was not in a calculation. The error was in a word. The error was in a 2-second silence and a suggestion to change before going out, and a comment made in a room full of people who had heard it. Small things. The kind of things that seemed, in the moment of committing them, like nothing at all. The kind of things that people remember. Story of Echo, Part 5 complete. Final word count, WC, W. Home/Claude. Her ex dumped her for being chubby. The same man who threatened him is now begging to survive.txt.